All right, so let's jump into a wild story from the NFL.
Yeah.
You've got a team heading into a must-win game, and they decide to spend almost $2 million on their rivals' tickets.
Yeah, that's right. We're talking about the Minnesota Vikings.
The
And
Minnesota Vikings, yeah.
what's so fascinating about this is the strategy behind it. I mean, it wasn't just about buying tickets, it was an investment.
Yeah, so set the scene for us, what was going on.
Well, this was week 18 of the NFL season, and the Vikings were up against the Detroit Lions.
Oh,
And
man, the tension must have been.
huge. Yeah, the stakes were incredibly high. The winner of this game would clinch the NFC North title
Wow.
and the #1 seed in the NFC playoffs.
That means a guaranteed first-round bye.
Exactly. Home field advantage throughout.
Huge advantage.
Yeah, the loser, though, they would end up with the 5th seed and a much tougher road to the Super Bowl.
So the Vikings are looking at this game, and they know they got to do something big.
Right.
So they come up with this plan to buy up, like, almost 2,000 tickets at Ford Field.
The Lions' home stadium.
That's a lot of tickets.
Yeah, and these weren't just any seats either.
Oh,
We're
well,
talking
that's-
crime spots right behind the visitors' bench, each one costing around $1,000.
Wow. So this is a serious investment.
Absolutely.
But then it gets even more interesting. They didn't just buy these tickets to keep them away from Lions fans. They offered them to their own season ticket holders.
At a huge discount.
Yeah, some going for as low as $200.
So what were they thinking?
What was the thought process?
Well, the Vikings, they claimed it was all about improving the game experience for their players' families, staff loyal fans.
Oh, sure, because usually the visiting team's fans are stuck way up in the nosebleeds.
Yeah, exactly.
You want your supporters to actually see the game.
Of course, but you can't help but think there was a strategic element to it as well.
Oh, for sure.
By flooding the stadium with their own fans, the Vikings were most likely aiming to disrupt the Lions' home field advantage.
Oh, yeah. Just imagine being a Lions player and looking out and seeing a sea of purple jerseys.
Yeah, it's like they're trying to turn an away game into a home game.
The Lions weren't too happy about it, though, were they?
Not at all. They called it fishy.
Yeah, I bet.
But in the end, the NFL ruled that it was all within the rules.
It does make you wonder, though, where's the line between fair play and, trying to gain an edge?
Yeah, it's a great question. Did the Vikings exploit a loophole?
Definitely a debate that goes beyond this one game.
Oh, absolutely. And let's not forget the historical context.
Yeah.
Both the Vikings and the Lions have never won a Super Bowl.
That's right.
This game had the weight of their entire franchise history riding on it.
And just to add to the pressure, this was the first time in NFL history that two teams with at least 13 wins each were facing off in the final week.
Wow. So you got this clash of titans, this historic rivalry, and then
you throw in this whole ticket scheme.
oh, yeah.
It's a recipe for drama.
And we can't forget about Week 7.
Oh,
Remember,
yeah.
the Lions barely beat the Vikings.
31-29.
With a last-minute field goal, talk about adding fuel to the fire. That close game definitely intensified things for this Week 18 matchup. It wasn't just about playoff seeding. It was about pride revenge bragging rights.
Oh,
And for the Vikings, this ticket scheme might have been their way of saying, we're not letting that happen again.
yeah, I like that.
Revenge game.
We're coming for you.
Exactly.
So we've got this high-stakes game, this heated rivalry, this bold move by the Vikings.
Yeah.
But did it actually work?
The payoff.
Yeah. Did this $2 million gamble actually lead to a win?
That's where the analysis gets really interesting. You see, can we definitively say that buying all those tickets directly translated to a Vikings victory?
Probably not.
Not necessarily, but you have to consider the psychological impact on both teams.
You mean like the mental game within the game?
Exactly. Think about it from the Vikings' perspective. They're on the road, but all of a sudden they're surrounded by their own fans.
Yeah.
That's got to be a huge confidence boost.
I bet.
And for the Lions, it must have been incredibly disorienting to play in what felt like a hostile environment.
On their own turf.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like the Vikings flipped the home field advantage.
Right.
Did they make the Lions feel like they were the ones on the road?
It's definitely possible. And even if it didn't directly affect how the players performed, it could have changed the energy of the crowd.
Instead of that roar of the home crowd, you've got pockets of Viking fans cheering.
Right. A much more subdued atmosphere.
You can't underestimate the power of crowd noise in football. It can really disrupt communication,
Oh, yeah.
rattle quarterbacks.
Absolutely. Even influence the referee's calls.
Wow.
So even if the Vikings didn't have a numerical advantage in the stands, they might have shifted the momentum just by changing the sound of the game.
That's a really good point. And we're talking about a sport where Even the tiniest advantage can be the difference.
Absolutely.
A missed field goal, a dropped pass, a penalty at a crucial moment.
It can all swing the outcome.
Exactly. So even if we can't say for sure that the Vikings ticket scheme won them the game,
Hmm.
it's clear that it could have created a bunch of little advantages.
Yeah. Psychological and tactical.
And this brings us to a bigger question about the future of home field advantage in sports in general. I mean, if a team can basically buy their way into a more favorable environment on the road, could this become a trend?
It's something to think about for sure. Imagine wealthy teams just routinely buying blocks of tickets in their opponents' stadiums.
Yeah, basically neutralizing that home field advantage.
Right. It would definitely shake things up. Leagues might have to make new rules to stop it from becoming the norm.
And it also brings up a really interesting question. What does home field advantage even mean anymore?
Yeah, is it about the actual location, the loyalty of the fans, something else entirely?
That's a really good question.
It's fascinating.
And it reminds us that even something as simple as buying tickets can have huge implications for the game itself.
Absolutely. And it's so interesting to think about how this type of strategy could play out in other sports.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Could we see soccer clubs, basketball teams, even baseball franchises doing the same thing?
It's definitely a possibility and something to keep an eye on.
Absolutely.
So we've really dug deep into this Vikings-Lions clash. And it seems like something as simple as buying tickets can really mess with the whole idea of home field advantage.
Yeah, it makes you wonder, doesn't it? What if this became a common tactic? What would happen to the game?
Would it just turn into a competition of who has the most money?
Right, and wouldn't that take away from the magic of a true home field advantage?
That roar of the crowd, the feeling that the entire city is behind you.
Exactly. Think about some of the most iconic moments in sports history. They often involve a team overcoming the odds on their home turf, powered by the energy of their fans.
So is it possible that the Vikings might have accidentally started a trend that could change professional sports forever?
It's worth considering, that's for sure. I mean, if teams with a lot of money start regularly buying up their opponents' tickets, leagues might have to step in and make new rules.
And even if they do, it still raises questions about fairness.
Right. Would it create an even bigger gap between the rich teams and the poor teams?
It's a valid concern because not every team can afford to do what the Vikings did.
That's true.
But beyond the money, there's a deeper question here about the spirit of competition.
What do you mean?
Well, the idea that the playing field should be level, that victory should be earned through skill and strategy.
Not by manipulating things outside the game.
Exactly. And while the Vikings ticket scheme was a smart move,
Savvy.
it does kind of blur the lines a little bit.
Yeah, it does.
It makes us ask how far is too far when it comes to getting a competitive edge.
That's a tough question.
It really is. And it reminds us that even something as seemingly simple as buying tickets can bring up a whole bunch of ethical and philosophical questions.
It's true, and that's the beauty of sports, isn't it? It's not just about winning and
A
losing.
reflection of us.
Yeah, our culture, our values, our conversations about fairness, competition, and the pursuit of excellence.
On that note, I think we've given everyone a lot to think about today. What started as a story about a team buying tickets turned into a deep dive into the very heart of what makes sports so captivating.
We've talked about the strategy, the psychology, the ethics, the potential ripple effects of this unusual tactic. And in the end, we've left you with more questions than answers.
Because sometimes the most interesting discoveries are the ones that lead to even more exploration and curiosity. So as you keep following the Vikings-Lions rivalry, and as you see other teams maybe trying similar strategies, and keep these questions in mind.
Will this ticket scheme become the norm? Will it fundamentally change how we think about home field advantage? And what does it tell us about how far teams are willing to go to win?
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time for another fascinating exploration of the world around us.
See that?
So we've got this high-stakes game, right? This heated rivalry, and the Vikings pulled this bold ticket strategy. But did it actually work?
Did their $2 million gamble pay off?
Yeah. Did it actually translate into a win?
Well, it's tough to say for certain if buying all those tickets directly led to a Vikings victory.
Yeah.
But we have to think about the psychological impact it had.
You mean on both teams?
Exactly. Like, imagine you're a Vikings player. You're on the road, but suddenly you're surrounded by your own fans.
Oh, yeah. That's got to feel good.
It's a huge confidence booster for sure. And on the flip side, think about the Lions.
Oh, man.
They're playing at home, but it feels like a hostile environment.
It's like the Vikings flipped the script on them.
Completely.
Make them feel like they were the away team.
That's a real possibility, and even if it didn't directly impact the player's performance on the field, it might have messed with the energy of the crowd.
Yeah, instead of that deafening roar of the home crowd, you've got these pockets of Vikings fans cheering.
It's a much more subdued atmosphere, you know?
And you can't underestimate the power of crowd noise in football.
Yeah,
I mean, it can throw off communication.
absolutely. Quarterbacks get rattled.
Referees' calls can even be influenced by it.
That's right. So even if the Vikings didn't have more fans in the stands, they might have shifted the momentum of the game.
Just by changing the sound.
Ex-
It's wild. And, in a sport like football, even the smallest advantage can be the difference between winning and losing.
Absolutely. A missed field goal, a dropped pass.
A penalty at just the wrong time.
It can all swing the outcome.
So even if we can't say for sure that the Vikings won because of this ticket scheme, it's pretty clear it could have given them a bunch of little advantages.
Little advantages that add up.
And this brings up a much bigger question about home field advantage in sports.
Yeah.
I mean, what if this becomes a trend?
Imagine teams just buying their way into a better environment on the road
Wealthy teams just gobbling up tickets at their opponents' stadiums.
and essentially neutralizing that home field advantage.
Leagues would have to step in, right?
They might have to create new rules to prevent it from becoming the norm.
It really makes you think, what does home field advantage even mean anymore?
Is it about the actual stadium? The loyalty of the fans?
Or is it something else entirely?
It's a fascinating question.
It really is. And it reminds us that something as simple as buying tickets can have these huge ripple effects.
Impacting the game in ways we might not even realize.
And it makes you wonder, could we see this kind of strategy in other sports too?
Oh, absolutely.
Soccer, basketball, baseball.
Imagine a soccer club buying up a section of their rival's stadium.
Wow, it's definitely something to keep an eye on.
Absolutely.
So we've really gone deep on this Vikings-Lions situation. And it's crazy to think that something as simple as buying tickets could completely change the idea of home field advantage.
Yeah, it makes you wonder if this became a normal tactic. Like if every team started doing this, what would happen to the game?
Would it just become about which team has more money to throw around?
Right. And wouldn't that take away from that special feeling of a true home field advantage?
The energy of the crowd, the sense that the whole city is behind their team.
Yeah, exactly. Think about some of those legendary moments in sports history. They often involve a team beating the odds at home, fueled by their fans, you know?
So do you think it's possible the Vikings accidentally started something that could change professional sports forever?
I think it's definitely possible. And if we start seeing teams with deep pockets buying up tickets at their opponent stadiums on a regular basis,
Yeah.
leagues might have to step in and create some new rules.
And even if they do, wouldn't that still raise questions about fairness?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, would it just make the gap between rich teams and poor teams even bigger?
It's a valid point. Not every team can afford to pull off a stunt like the Vikings did.
Right.
But even beyond the money issue, there's a bigger question here about the spirit of competition.
What do you mean?
The idea that everyone should be playing on a level playing field.
That victory should be earned through skill and strategy.
Yeah, not by manipulating things outside of the game.
Right. And while the Vikings move was definitely a smart strategy,
Pretty savvy.
it kind of makes you think about where the line is.
Yeah,
How far is too far when it comes to trying to win?
it's a tough question, and it reminds us that even something as basic as buying tickets can open up a whole can of worms.
A lot of ethical and philosophical dilemmas.
Exactly, and that's what's so interesting about sports. It's not just about the final score.
It reflects who we are as a society.
Our values, our culture.
And it sparks these conversations about fairness, competition, and the pursuit of excellence.
Well, I think we've given everyone a lot to chew on today. What started as a story about one team buying tickets turned into this deep dive into the very heart of what makes sports so fascinating.
We've talked about the strategy, the psychology, the ethics, the potential long-term effects, and I think we've ended up with more questions than answers.
And sometimes those are the best kinds of discoveries, the ones that spark even more curiosity. So as you keep up with the Vikings-Lions rivalry and maybe see other teams try similar things, keep these questions in mind.
Will this become the new normal? Will it change how we think about home field advantage? And what does it all say about what teams are willing to do to win?
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time for another exploration of the world around us.
See you then.